Okay, everyone, so this is Werner. He is a 1993 Mercedes-Benz 300E. Internally, he's known as the W124 platform. They made this car from 1985, I believe, until 1996, when this model was replaced by the W210 chassis, which is the wagon over there. This was a car that broke many records, I guess you could say, with regard to its engineering, its design, its safety. Everything went into this car that Mercedes engineers could manage to squeeze into it. This was a time when the accountants were locked in the basement and the engineers ran the show, and their job was to build the most perfect car they could build, regardless of cost. Cost was not an issue with Mercedes back in the 70s, the 80s, and into the early to mid 90s. They built the car to a quality standard, and then after the smoke cleared, then they decided what they would sell it at. Hence why these cars were so horrendously expensive back in the day. This car here would have cost about $50,000, and that is 1993 dollars, not today's dollars. So if you inflate that, this car today would be, would cost well over $100,000. And they were worth it. They weren't the most, they weren't the most luxurious cars in the world, not back then. And they weren't built to be. They were built, the luxury was in the engineering and the quality that was built into them. So these cars, they didn't have a lot of fancy gadgetry like cars today have, which is just wretched. These cars were built very simply, and they did have some luxurious appointments, but they were pretty simple, actually. So again, their luxury was in, the philosophy was, the car had everything it needed and nothing that it did not. So we're gonna do a quick walk around of the car. Give me a second and let me get everything opened up. Okay, so we're back. So again, Werner is a 1993 model year, so keep in mind he's 30 years old as you're viewing him. This is a 30-year-old car. Now, I bought this off of I bought him off of a friend of mine who is also a car enthusiast, and he owned it for 2 years before he sold it to me yesterday. And before that, Werner is literally an old lady car. He was purchased new here in Pennsylvania, about 30 minutes away, and he was owned and driven by an elderly lady. She was basically a homemaker. She used Werner to run errands to the grocery store and whatnot. So he had a very gentle life. He's always been garage kept. It kills me that he's not going to be garage kept now, but a car cover for him, a 6-layer protective car cover, is going to be delivered tomorrow. So it is my hope, if I can not be lazy about it, to keep him under a car cover whenever he's not being driven. Because again, this is a 30-year-old car. Everything you see is original. He's 99.99% original, and I'll get into that in a second. But the paint, everything is original to the car. He has a few blemishes on the paint that I already have touch-up paint on order. That should be here in about a week, and then I'll do a little bit of touch-up, some paint correction. But aside from that, this car is about as mint as you can get for a 30-year-old car that has been driven. It's been driven on the highway to Frederick, you know, during the week, kind of like a quasi-daily commuter car, just a few days a week. So he has been used. I spent about 5 hours today giving him a good clean and detail. This is the engine bay. I gave the engine bay a good cleaning and scrubbing, because you know, if I do have to lift the hood and do anything under any of these cars, it's a lot more pleasant of an experience if the engine bay is pretty clean and looks tidy. So this is the engine. It is a 2.8 liter inline six. One of the coolest things about this engine is the fact that it's going to be very easy for me to do simple things like changing spark plugs. The spark plugs are actually right up here. There's 6 of them in line. All I have to do is pop off this top cover, unscrew the spark plugs, and put them back in. This will be like a 30-minute job. Some of the other cars, you have to almost stand on your head to get to the spark plugs. It took me about 5 hours to change the spark plugs in Cherry a few years ago. So that was not a pleasant experience, but I wanted to do it so that I knew how to do it. So we're gonna just kind of walk around here. And again, 30 years old. Everything original. Now let me pan back out here. So the trunk, one of the coolest things about this car, well, these cars were used in Europe extensively. They were commissioned for things like taxi cabs. So having a decent sized back seat and especially a lot of trunk space was very, very important. And Mercedes knew this when they were designing and building these cars. So this is a huge cavernous trunk. You can get a ton of cargo back here. And again, 30-year-old car. The trunk has basically probably never seen any use much at all. One of the neatest things, so we're gonna lift the carpet back and we're gonna pull up this thing here. Okay, so this is the original Michelin spare tire. All of this is original. And down here, this is like an archaeological dig. Down here, that red bag in there, that is the toolkit that came with every Mercedes. Now this one is still in its sealed plastic bag. It has never come out of this bag for 30 years. The bag still says Mercedes on it. And it's hysterical because if I was to put that on eBay, for instance, the tool bag alone would probably sell for a few $100s, just because it's so unusual. And any kind of collector or car enthusiast, that, you know, that's just gold to them. It still has the original jack mounted there. It still has the original tag on the jack. I mean, it's just, the car has been so amazingly well maintained that this is why I had to have it. When Michael texted me last week and asked me if I knew anybody who might be interested in the car, he truly wasn't trying to get me to take it. But once I saw the photos, I just told him, I said, you can't sell this car to anyone else. Most people would look at this and just see a 30-year-old car and unfortunately, a lot of people would just treat it like that. They would treat it like a 30-year-old car, and they wouldn't care for it the way it should be cared for in this condition. I mean, again, this is, you really would swear it was new. There are a few, again, there's just a few paint blemishes, just, you know, just a couple little scrapes and scratches, nothing, just surface, nothing major. So all of this, once I get the touch-up paint, all of that will go away. This is the interior, the back seat. Back up in here, this is also really cool. Mercedes always had first aid kits. This is the original first aid kit. It's never been touched. This is the back seat area. I do need to hunt down some floor mats. Michael tried to find floor mats for the rear and only was able to find floor mats for the front. So I'm still going to be on the lookout for floor mats for the rear. But in the meantime, as you can see, you know, I mean, everything is almost pristine. I mean, the carpeting, the upholstery, everything is, I mean, it really truly is a brand new car in almost every sense of the word. So the 0.1% or whatever it is that's not original is the headliner. The headliner was sagging a little bit, and so when Michael purchased the car, he actually had the headliner redone. So that is the one thing on this car that has been redone. Everything else you see literally is the original everything. It's like driving a time capsule. And I've only driven it a few times since I took possession of it yesterday, but it's an absolute dream to drive. I understand now why they say that this is, you know, perhaps the most perfect car ever built. It drives like an absolute tank. All of my Mercedes are tanks, and they all are insanely safe and rigid and sound on the road. But this one in particular is even more so, if that's possible. Some of the details, you know, this is all, you know, this is real Zebrano wood, you know, hand cut and finished and polished and put into the car. And again, these cars weren't incredibly luxurious, so to speak. They have, you know, they have, it's very subtle. The luxury is in the subtleties, and that's one of the things that I love so much about Mercedes. They're very understated. They're not flashy. I don't like flashy, and I don't like anything that's too overdone. And Mercedes, there's the bank vault doors. That's what Mercedes delivers. Again, you know, we're looking at a 30-year-old car. None of these seats, the seats have never been redone. They're all original. Some quirky, funny things about the car. So again, so the car was designed and first went into production in the mid-'80s, before airbags, or at least before airbags became a more standard item. Mercedes was, I believe, the first car to offer airbags. Now this car, being in '93, it was old enough, or rather I should say it was far enough into production years to receive a passenger airbag. So one of the quirky things, this over here, up until the, I think, 92 or 93 model year, would have been a glove compartment. But they modified it and they made it the airbag for the passenger side instead. So it's just another example of how Mercedes and these cars evolved over time. They did not come out with a new model every few years, which is, you know, pretty standard today. They built a car, and they built it perfectly, and then they manufactured it for, you know, a decade before they retired it and came out with something new. So the solution for the glove box was this double console here. So this console, if I can do this, they put a second little console in down here that has a lock on it. So if you did have any valuables, like you would be able to with a glove box, you could put things down in this second console and lock it. And then you had, of course, then you had the armrest here with more storage. You have, I mean, look at the wood. The wood is just fantastic. You just don't see this today. Even in a Mercedes, you don't see this. You have all your window controls down there. You have the fader for the speakers. You have the mirror control. This model year was old enough, or far enough in, they actually had power mirrors for both the drivers and the passenger's door. Originally, Mercedes, and again, this is just engineers, this is just an engineer's way of thinking. Originally, Mercedes, when they came out with a power mirror, it was only for the passenger side, because that was the side that the driver would not be able to reach. The driver's side was still a manual mirror that you adjusted with a little knob. And you know, again, it's just one of those quirky things, but when you think about it, it's perfect logic. Why do you need a power mirror for something that's a foot away from your hand? So this was just the kind of thought that went into these cars, and you know, just everything was over engineered. That's the original stereo, still works. The climate control, the air conditioning in here is frigid cold. It's wonderful. The dashboard has the dashboard is perfect. It has no cracks, no blemishes at all. So again, because it was a garage kept for so many years, the dashboard survived and looks brand new. The instrument cluster, very classic cluster. Again, this is another reason why I choose to drive older cars. I refuse to drive a car that has an iPad strapped to the dashboard. I just absolutely refuse it. I think it's just abominable to me, and I want a real instrument cluster. So this is, and the car has just a little over 132,000 miles on it. So this car is barely broken in. This car would in theory last forever. The way Mercedes designed their cars, they back when this car was built, these were true luxury items to be purchased and maintained and kept forever. Automobiles only started to become disposable items within the last 15 years or so. But, you know, before that, Mercedes' philosophy was people are going to purchase these cars and they're going to keep them forever, or possibly pass them down to, you know, another generation to continue to drive. So that's why they were engineered so incredibly, and that's why they were built so well. And that's also why, you know, this is testament that if you maintain it and you don't abuse your vehicle, this is what it could look like 30 years down the road, provided it's a Mercedes. You won't see another 30-year-old car of any make look quite this well or hold up quite this well. There was just a thought process that went into these cars by the engineers that is just nothing else comes close. Another reason I love driving these cars is everything's very familiar. This is kind of crazy, but we're gonna get down here. So Mercedes doesn't change anything. The pattern, the stamped pattern on the pedals, for instance, that same pattern can be found in Sebastian, the 1976. It can be found in Victoire, the convertible, the 1984. It can be found in Cherry, the 2002. And it can also be found in Amalia, the 1999 wagon. So again, something as simple as pedals, why reinvent a wheel? They used the same exact pattern on the accelerator and brake pedals for 40 plus years. Ditto the some of the instruments here. This is the light mechanism, and again, this light mechanism more or less is identical in every single car that I have. All 6 cars have the same layout. It's the knob. All the hieroglyphics are exactly the same. So it doesn't matter what car I'm sitting in. I don't even have to look. I know exactly where everything is, and I know how to use it because it's all the same. This, the cruise control stalk, the wiper stalk, all of the hieroglyphics are identical for 40 plus years. Everything on the dash, on the instrument cluster is identical. It's, and they did this for a reason. They did this because they knew the people that bought these cars. These people, they were old money, and old money does not like change. They like consistency. And so if they were going to buy a new car, let's say 20 years down the road, Mercedes understood that they wanted to still feel like they were in the same car, so to speak. And so they built these cars with that in mind. So there was a lot of consistency, spanning decades. Another quirky little thing about these cars. So when these cars first went into production, power seats they weren't an option. They hadn't really developed power seat controls yet. So when they did, because the car originally started out without this, they didn't have enough room to put the headrest button. So they have the seat cushion, and they have the seat back, and then they just had to kind of stick the headrest button over here behind. But again, it just shows the fact that this design lasted for 10 years, and so the car evolved with the times rather than them come out with a new model or a complete redesign. They just kind of figured out a way, the engineers, to add these new options and still make them work. So I think it's very charming. Mercedes was the first to use controls like this. A few years later, you found this in every single car that was manufactured. Everybody was using this, but this was a Mercedes first. Another thing that was added later, of course, was the center mount brake light. So if it looks like it was just kind of slapped in there, it's because it was. Up until this car was penned on the drawing board back in the late 70s, actually, and it went into production in the early 80s. I believe 85 was the first model year in Europe, and then when they began importing it into the US in 1986, 1986 was the first model year where the center mount brake light was mandatory in passenger vehicles. So Mercedes, in response to that, they slapped one back here in the window. So it's just very charming, the way they did these cars. And I don't know, I could go on and on about them, but this car, like I said, I've only driven it a few times, but it's an absolute tank. It's an absolute dream to drive it. There's a few gremlins, which, any older car is going to have a few gremlins. The only things I found with this car so far, there's a fuse in the fuse box that keeps blowing. And it's the fuse. Yesterday, I was, when I was tinkering around with the car, I took it for a drive. I did the shocks on the front tires yesterday afternoon, And after I got the shocks done, I wanted to take it for a short drive just to make sure everything was, was fine. And it was starting to get a little bit dark, and I turned on the headlights, and my dashboard lights did not work. And so then I climbed out and I turned all the lights on, and I walked around the car, and so the dash lights don't work, the center console lights don't work, and the passenger side front and rear marker light do not work. So, and I was a little bit puzzled. So when I got back home, I pulled the schematic for the fuses, and it turns out the fuse that's blown controls all of those lights. So, and I replaced the fuse, the second fuse blew. So there's a short somewhere, I guess, in the wiring. So I'm gonna have to try and figure that out. Not a huge inconvenience. I'm going to be driving the car mostly to work just a few days a week, and it's gonna be daylight anyway. The headlights still work, the turn signals still work. Everything that I need if I was driving at night, necessary to drive safely, all of those lights work. It's just the few running lights, and of course the dashboard lights, which would be a little bit inconvenient, but years ago when I had my Camry, it was old and the dashboard lights stopped working in it. And the funny thing is, you just kind of get used to things over time, and it's like, well, yep, I can't see the dashboard. So if I needed to see something on the instrument cluster, I would just turn the overhead light on. But aside from that, everything works. Everything in this car still works. Everything is perfect, and everything is tight. The steering is tight, the braking is tight. It feels like a brand new car. It does not feel like a 30-year-old car. It's the strangest thing. But I'm absolutely in love with Werner, and I wasn't sure what to do about naming the car. And I kind of had to wait till I got him home. But after I got him home, I decided he looks, I'm gonna pan out. There we go. He has a very athletic, almost muscular stance to him. Just the way the wheels, just the lines, everything is very substantial, very athletic and muscular looking. And I just thought, this car is a boy. It just seems like this car is a boy. So I wanted something German, but I also wanted something very old money. So I decided on Werner, and I think it fits him perfectly. And tomorrow will be, he's officially cleaned up and ready to go as part of the fleet. So tomorrow I will be taking him to work, and I'll probably drive him most of the week just to get a feel for him and make sure there isn't anything wrong that I haven't noticed yet. But so far, there's just aside from the little light issue, I can't find anything wrong with this car. Everything is just absolutely perfect. So this is Werner.